The habitat had a way of pretending it was relaxed while quietly measuring everything. The floors adjusted their texture depending on foot pressure. The air recycled itself with an almost judgmental efficiency, and the walls, smooth, pale, and faintly humming, kept records even when they looked like they weren't paying attention. The human had learned this the hard way, after waving too enthusiastically on his first day and triggering a localized etiquette alert that took 3 hours to clear. He'd adapted since then, mostly. That was why the flowers surprised even him. They weren't native, obviously. Nothing organic grew freely here unless it had been approved, cataloged, and assigned a maintenance schedule. These came from a hydro module he wasn't technically supposed to access without a request form and a witness. He told himself he'd return them later. He always told himself that. Humans were excellent at telling themselves things. She was standing near the observation pane when he noticed her, the stars stretching behind her in disciplined constellations. At first glance, she could have passed for human, which was what always disarmed him. The differences revealed themselves only if you stopped pretending not to notice. Skin catching light in a way that suggested depth rather than reflection. Ears drawn back in a subtle, elegant sweep. Eyes carrying a faint silver sheen that made direct eye contact feel like a mutual agreement rather than a coincidence. She turned when she sensed him, not startled, just aware. Everyone here was aware all the time. It was exhausting. He held out the flowers before his brain could submit the proper cautionary paperwork. "I thought the place could use some color," he said, instantly regretting the word thought. Thinking was rarely considered a valid justification in this society. For a moment, nothing happened. Not even the walls hummed. Then the corridor went quiet, in a way that felt expensive. She looked at the flowers, then at him, then at the flowers again, as if checking whether they might rearrange themselves into something more legally acceptable. Around them, several aliens paused mid-motion. One of them dropped a data slate. It clattered loudly, which somehow made the silence worse. "These are alive," she said carefully. "Only temporarily," he replied, because humor was his first line of defense and his last. "I mean, not because of you. That sounded bad." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to make him hopeful. The patterns beneath her skin shifted subtly, like a system recalculating priorities. "You are signaling," she said. "Oh, no. I mean, yes, but not officially, I think. It's more of a vibe thing." That was when the habitat lights dimmed by exactly 4%, the universal sign that a procedural escalation had begun. She raised her gaze back to him, curiosity now layered with something heavier. "In my culture," she said, "this signal is associated with intent, long-term intent." He swallowed. "How long-term are we talking?" Her head tilted, the motion precise but not unfriendly. The kind that usually involves contracts, shared dwellings, and the permanent merging of social records. He stared at the flowers. They stared back, unhelpful and brightly innocent. Okay, he said slowly. So just so we're clear, what does marriage mean here? The first rule of the Transit Council was simple. Never bring personal items into a chamber designed for collective decisions. The second rule was less official, but far more important. Never let a human speak first if there was even a remote chance of misunderstanding. Unfortunately, no one had enforced the second rule. The human found himself seated at a crescent-shaped table that adjusted its height every time someone shifted their posture, which meant it was constantly moving just enough to be annoying. Around him sat representatives of 12 species, each projecting calm authority, restrained curiosity, or in one case, mild contempt, disguised as excellent posture. He cleared his throat. The table lowered slightly, as if encouraging him. He did not appreciate that. I just want to clarify, he began, that what happened earlier was not a formal declaration, a ritual challenge, or a legally binding gesture. It was more like a Tuesday. Several translation nodes flickered. One of them emitted a soft chime that usually preceded bad news. Across the table, the alien woman observed him with an expression that suggested she was both amused and genuinely interested in how this would go wrong. Her eyes tracked not just his words, but his pauses, his breathing, the micro-expressions humans forgot they made. Long memory species tended to do that. They collected moments the way humans collected excuses. In your species, she said calmly, you offer biological beauty without contractual intent? Constantly, he replied. Sometimes to apologize, sometimes to flirt, sometimes because we walked past a shop and panicked. That earned a ripple of confused murmurs. One delegate tapped their cranial crest against the table in what might have been laughter or a neurological reset. The council interface projected a rotating symbol above them, indicating cultural ambiguity. It was bright yellow. That was never a good color. Your action, another voice said, filtered through 3 layers of diplomacy, initiated a probabilistic shift in her social trajectory. He blinked. I bought flowers, not a futures market. The alien woman leaned forward slightly. Yet here we are. Despite himself, he smiled. There was something refreshing about a society that took gestures seriously, even if it made casual kindness feel like a loaded weapon. Humans, by contrast, tended to treat meaning like a suggestion. A small drone drifted down, projecting legal frameworks in dense, unreadable patterns. He squinted at it. Is there a version of this that comes with pictures? The drone paused, then adjusted the display to include simplified icons. One of them looked suspiciously like 2 figures holding hands next to a shared habitation unit. Oh, he said, that's very direct? Yes. Well, he said, leaning back as the table rose in response. For what it's worth, where I come from, misunderstandings like this usually end with an awkward laugh and a story you tell your friends. Her lips curved again, this time unmistakably. Where I come from, she said, They usually end with a choice. The yellow symbol above them shifted, slowly, into a neutral blue. The council waited. And for the first time since arriving among the stars, the human realized that sincerity, unstructured, impulsive, profoundly human, might be the most disruptive force of all. By the time the station's internal clock synchronized to something resembling night, the human had learned three important facts. First, alien hospitality protocols were designed by people who thought comfort was a variable. Second, nothing on the station was ever truly private. Third, and this one worried him most, he was now the subject of a sociological observation thread labeled Unexpected Bonding Event, Floral Catalyst. He found this out because a wall politely informed him. The wall shimmered, displayed the title, then added a footnote explaining that the phrase floral catalyst had no direct translation, but carried mild romantic implications and a strong legal aftertaste. "Of course it does," he muttered. A soft chime announced a visitor before he could argue with architecture. The door dilated, revealing her. She moved with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided that panic was inefficient. Her presence caused the ambient gravity to subtly recalibrate, which he chose to interpret as a compliment rather than a warning. "I was informed," she said, "that you prefer conversations without witnesses." "I prefer a lot of things that space stations don't offer," he replied. "Coffee that tastes like regret, for example." She considered this. "We have a beverage that induces mild existential sorrow." "That'll do." They sat. The seating adjusted itself twice before giving up and becoming a bench, clearly offended. For a moment, neither spoke. Not out of tension, out of mutual confusion. It was surprisingly comfortable. "You are concerned," she said eventually. "I'm human," he answered it. "It's our default setting." She tilted her head. "You did not intend to alter my social trajectory." "No, I barely manage my own." This time, she laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real, and something in the room's sensors spiked in response. Somewhere a register got very excited. "In my culture," she said, "flowers are given once, at the beginning of a shared future." "In mine," he said, "they're given once you realize you forgot a birthday." She absorbed this with the seriousness of someone updating a worldview. Your species assigns meaning retroactively, constantly. It keeps therapists employed. A pause, not awkward, thoughtful. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked at him, really looked, with eyes that had watched centuries compress into policy and expand into memory. "Now," she said, "we decide whether misunderstanding must always be corrected or whether it can be transformed." He smiled, slow and uncertain. "You know, where I come from, most life-changing moments start with someone saying, 'This is probably a bad idea.'" Her expression softened. "Then your species is honest." Outside, the station hummed, unaware it was hosting something far more disruptive than war or diplomacy. Two people sat on a bench that refused to behave, negotiating the space between accident and intention. And somehow, against all probability models, it felt less like a mistake, and more like the beginning of a very strange joke the universe was telling, gently, at its own expense. By the time the council chamber finished rearranging itself into what it believed was a non-threatening shape, the human had already accepted that his life would never again be small. The room pulsed with soft light, translating emotions into colors he chose not to interpret. Somewhere above them, probability engines were recalculating purposes and quietly panicking. He stood where he had never intended to stand, at the center of something important, wearing a jacket that still smelled faintly of crushed petals. "This is highly irregular," one of the delegates said. Its voice came from 3 directions, and none of them convincingly. The gesture was unregistered. "It was a bouquet," the human replied, "not a weapon." "Flowers are classified as symbolic accelerants," another voice added. "Category 4. He sighed. Months ago, he would have apologized. Months ago, he would have explained, minimized, retreated. Now, he just looked over his shoulder at her. She stood there, with the same calm she always carried. Her almost human face, composed, eyes reflecting layers of memory no human archive could hold. The faint, bioluminescent patterns along her temples pulsed once. Amusement, he had learned. She had taught him that. He had taught her sarcasm. Both civilizations would suffer. He did not propose, she said to the chamber. He offered connection without understanding consequence. That is not binding. That is human. The word rippled through the room like a dropped glass. The council paused. System's word. Somewhere an ancient law coughed politely. "And your request?" the chamber asked her. "I choose reinterpretation," she said. "We will redefine the gesture. Flowers will no longer signify ownership or obligation. They will signify intent to be kind without certainty." Silence. Then outrage. Then fascination. The human blinked. "You're rewriting tradition." "Yes," she said, "with your permission." He laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You know, back home, that usually takes generations and at least one badly named movement." The chamber dimmed, then brightened. Consensus, apparently, had been reached, or at least postponed indefinitely, which counted as progress. Later, much later, they sat again on a bench that still hadn't forgiven them. The station felt different now, less watchful, or maybe he was. "I used to think meaning was fragile," he said, "that if you got it wrong, everything broke." She leaned back, looking at the stars like old acquaintances. "Meaning is resilient. It adapts, like you." He considered that. He thought about the man who had brought flowers because it felt right, not because it mattered, and the one who stood in a council chamber and let a civilization bend instead of stepping aside. "I guess," he said, "I've learned to ask what something could mean, not just what it's supposed to." She smiled, unmistakably now. then the gesture was successful. Outside, a small policy update propagated across the network, flagged as minor cultural adjustment. Inside, two people watched the universe continue, vast, indifferent, and occasionally kind enough to misunderstand itself into something better.